What's good, YouTube, man? We're back with another video, man. And today, we'll be talking about a little something controversial, like we always sometimes do, man. And that will be difference if Fullmetal Alchemist, Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood is the correct version to watch. And now, I preface this by saying there's no right answer. Um, Many people will tell you, oh, it's just full blown conclusion, Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, right? And the only leg they have to stand on to say that this is factually the way to better one to watch is because yes, it follows the manga to a T, whereas the first iteration 2003 FMA does not. It deviates on its own path because it caught up to the manga, therefore, and was so popular that they decided to branch off and just do their own thing. So this point of this video is I have always had the opinion that I preferred the 2003 version. Now, do I think people are wrong when they say Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood is better? Not necessarily. I don't think Brotherhood is worse than FMA, and I don't think FMA is particularly better in a sense. What I really want to get into is the fact that what are the main differences for me for MFA versus MFAB? So some of the main differences I feel is I'm just gonna go ahead and jump straight into it. The very biggest issue I have is the conclusion of both stories. I'm a person that I kind of like the hardcore, like, oh, this, like, not everything has to be a happy ending, and sometimes life just happens, like even though you're watching a TV show, like understanding that life just happens, like these things happen, right? And what I mean by that is like the end of FMA, it's essentially the same thing that FMAB did, except in a different way. So in FMA, obviously, if you haven't actually watched FMA, because I know there's a lot of people that have only watched FMAB, kind of goes down the same path. Alphonse, but the difference is Alphonse is lost. He's sent beyond the gate because he himself had the Philosopher's Stone built inside of him. We'll dive a little bit deeper into that, but just a long story short, he basically resurrected Ed because Ed had been killed by envy. And so Alphonse basically used his Philosopher's Stone to basically bring Ed back. Okay, and Ed seeing this, him coming back, there was nothing else really like for him to. He didn't want to live in a world without Alphonse, right? Because I mean, at the end of the day, he's the big brother. He was the one supposed to be taking care of the little brother, not the other way around. So what he ends up doing is he ends up transmuting himself, because we always preach on the equivalence of exchange. And in the first version, always was like super big on that, right? And both versions are harp on the equivalence and exchange philosophy. But I feel like FMA really went hard on that because for this exact reason is because Alphonse is beyond the gate. For lack of better terms, he's dead. What's the what is the equivalence of another human life? Well, obviously, it would be another human life to take that place. But that's essentially what Ed does. He transmutes himself. He gives up everything to just basically bring Al back. And Al comes back in his normal body, no issues whatsoever, right? And I think this is a lot better, like just from like a not everything ended out perfectly, right? It's not a storybook ending, right? So and the tone of the series had never been about being a storybook. It's about the hard truths of the reality of the world, right? And not to say FMAB doesn't have that stuff at the end, right? But when you look at it, Ed and Al in FMAB end up having that perfect, like not perfect, but like damn near a perfect storybook ending, right? But whereas FMA was a little bit more in tune with the rest of the series. And you could argue during FMAB there was a lot more, say, like lightheaded, not lightheaded, lighthearted type of moments where like you could tell, all right, this story does seem a lot more gleeful, like a lot more hopeful than the first series, right? But it's just like, at the end of FMAB, it's just like, all right, cool. I'll sacrifice my alchemy and all, like, everything that I've, experienced with these people. Just, and boom, I'll get Alphonse's entire body back. Okay. And the only thing he lost was the ability to use alchemy. Does that suck? Yes, because everybody else around him can still use alchemy. It does suck. But I will say, when as far as it comes to like harsh reality of things that happen in the story for FMAB, I feel like Mustang gets it the worst because Mustang is like in the final battle, he's basically just, his sight is just stolen from him. It's not like he made the bad decision like how like Ed and Al did, right? He didn't do it anything. He was just forced upon it and lost his vision. But then he has to, later on go on to still, lead a successful life while blind, which still is like, a good thing in its own. But he's also got Hawkeye on his side because, I mean, life's gonna be a little bit better. You got a little Reese on your side, you know what I'm saying? But yeah, like, so just like some of the like chilling aspects of the different series, something I always hit home with me is like I felt like a lot more like glued to saying like, damn, this is really. And I remember watching, and I watched FMA when I was younger, so it was coming on Adult Swim, and I just remember, especially during like the greed portion, like seeing the greed portion, and then meeting Dante for the first time, like that whole like environment and just like how chilling it was seeing Ed get his first kill and just like seeing that raw emotion, and you see that. And then there's also like the filler, like, I mean, obviously it's filler because like none of, like the whole, pretty much the entire series is filler, but it's just like where they're on the trip and they're meeting like other like people early in the story. They're going to like from town to town trying to learn stuff about the Philosopher's Stone, and he runs into this one town where this guy who apparently was writing letters to Hohenheim, their dad. They go to meet him and then they find out like, oh, this guy has been like fucking making human puppets, trying to recreate to bring his love back. And then it's just to find out that his love that he thought was dead wasn't actually dead. She just like had suffered a bad accident, got a head injury, and then she aged, so he couldn't really tell who she was. And then that gripping reality hit him. It's like, oh shit, you're her, but you aged, and now my perfect like vision of you is just damaged beyond repair. And it's just like you get to see a lot more of the fucked up things that people do in that series. And then I feel like the way Dante and Hohenheim's story was a lot more dark and a lot more twisting, right? Obviously now, if I just show like the dwarf in the bottle in Hohenheim, that was the most fucked up, right? Because they killed basically a whole fucking civilization, right? For the dwarf to get basically Hohenheim's like whatever. But what I would say is like the Dante and Hohenheim in the original, in the 2003 version, is they're sitting there living throughout decades, and they're like kind of like, it shows them kind of like in a cult type thing, or they're just going from cult to cult, and they're just like using people to get what they need, and then to go on to the next life, and I think that's a lot more like crazy to think about it, and then you see like the repercussions of it. You see like Hohenheim and Dante's bodies are literally breaking down because the soul is not meant to sit there and jump from body to body to body. You know what I'm saying? And I just think that stuff's a lot more cooler, and I feel like it's underappreciated a lot when you think about, when people talk about the two different series. Like a lot of people are just quick to just say, "Oh man, FMA trash, don't watch that." Blah blah blah. FMAB is the only one to watch, and they're they're not wrong in thinking FMB is the right one to watch, but they're wrong in the sense of saying you shouldn't watch FMA because I feel like if you're not watching FMA, if you haven't watched both, you're robbing yourself truly of a great experience, great viewing experience. And I would also say FMAB, even though it is supposed to be to a T the manga, it does have little caveats to where it thinks you would have already watched the 2003 version because especially like early on, a lot of the stuff that happens, if you were to pull from the FMA viewing, it helps support and carry the story a lot more, right? Like the first, like especially just really early on, right? But I sound like I'm saying a lot of pro FMA things, and there are a lot of pro FMA things. And I've said a couple anti FMAB. If I had to say good things about FMAB, it is obviously objectively the better overarching story. You get to see more world building. We actually get to go to up north. Some of the characters are a lot better. I do feel like somebody I'm torn between. I'm torn between two things. I'm torn between two characters. Actually, that's a lie. I'm torn between three. Torn between three, and which character is better in which version. So the first one I'll tackle is Kimberly. Kimberly in the first version in 2003 he seemed more of like just a regular just psycho, you know what I'm saying? Like he shows up kind of towards like the end of the series, right? He's like pretty much just like a wild dog, a psychopath, whatever, and he just wants to cause violence. But there's like key moments where like he is like the embodiment of like the world is cruel, and you can say he's the same way in the FMAB, but I feel like in FMAB he's a little bit more of a core kind of character. Like he kind of just like he actually still is. He's a part of planning of like certain events. He's going around being a figurehead to do certain things, and he just seems like a more put together character. But I do think the FMA version still has some merit to him because you see stuff like when they're in Ishval and it's showing the flashback between Hawkeye getting like the first jitters of like war, right? And he's just like he just comes in with a great speech to both Hawkeye and Roy, and it's just like explaining, was like, hey, you got to get it together because at the end of the day, they not gonna care. They think you're the enemy. They're coming at you. You know what I'm saying? And like this is the world, but really great character regardless. But I would say FMAB does it better. The other one is Greed or Ling Ying, or I suck. I suck with Chinese names. Sorry, but yeah, Greed and his dynamic. So in FMA, Greed is a very interesting character because he's one of the homunculi that's shown to be like his own person and like and not really care about running with the cult to do like whatever bidding that the shadow figure, which ends up being Dante, has him do, right? But you still get to see like a little bit of wisdom from him, like when he's fighting Ed. He's not trying to be like a straight up just ruthless killer. He does like fuck him up, right? But it's like he's living up to his name, Greed. Like, and I feel like the Greed you meet at the beginning of FMAB is the same Greed, and they kind of don't really seem that different. It isn't until he later on, comes back and is merged with the Prince and whatnot that you start to see a different Greed. But overall, obviously, I would prefer the FMAB Greed. And the third character would be Scar. So Scar is an interesting character because this is one of the ones where I'd say I'd actually kind of lean towards the FMA version. And hear me out now, because FMAB Scar is still really goated, and his like last like fight, obviously with King Bradley, is really cool, and you get to see him have his like kind of like redemption of being like the unnamed Ishvalan and whatnot. But I think what the FMA did with Scar's brother and showing like the flashbacks and like hammering home of like who Scar is and what he does it for and stuff like that, it it was very impactful. And the fact that Scar was basically the one that created the newest current Philosopher's Stone, and he ended up giving it to Alphonse because he knew Alphonse was the right person because he wasn't going to be around to do anything with it, and he knew like Alphonse would know the best way to handle this and not let it fall into the wrong hands, right? So I just feel like that Scar was a lot more. I want to say wasn't a lot more depth to him. I think both characters had good amount of depth, but I just kind of resonated with that Scar a little bit more. I also feel like the Ishvalan like backstory felt stronger with that version of Scar than the other one. Not to say neither one of them like felt bad, but I just felt like it was a lot more, you know, impactful and meaningful for that Scar version. But other than that, not to just make this too much of a run-on long video, I just wanted to really get the thoughts out there of like why I value the 2003 version. I could list off a couple of things that I just think, you know, just a small like Roy and Ed going at it in the fight over a cat, you know, or like you know the loser had to take care of a cat, stuff like that was really cool. But all in all, man, if people ever tell you that hey, you should watch FMAB, and then and say don't worry about FMA, I just try if you care to stop them and be like, hey, nah, they should watch both, right? And whether the order they watch it in, it doesn't matter. Me, I'd recommend the 2003, then FMAB, because I feel like that just you get. It's kind of like if you watch like the main story, and then you go watch a spin-off like different variation of it. I feel like it's a little bit different. Whereas if you watch like a spin-off different variation, then you go watch the main story, it hits a little bit different because it's like, all right, cool, this was a good story. Let's see what the main one does, right? Whereas like I feel like if you watch the main one, you're already in your head. I was like, oh, okay, well, not really too cared about a variation of what it might do, and it might just not be as good. You know, you go in there kind of close minded a little bit. But y'all let me know what y'all think, man. Have y'all seen both? Have you only watched one or the other? Which one do you prefer? You know, just give your thoughts and your opinions and whatnot. But as always, man, like, comment, subscribe. Peace.